And welcome to Character Class. We're back again, and this week I would like to offer you all 5 tips for playing the Technocracy. Now, the Technocracy is a faction of antagonists in Mage the Ascension, but there have been many books put out by White Wolf for the World of Darkness, that allows players to play the Technocracy instead of the traditions, which are what the usual mages are from. And I'm here to offer you 5 tips on playing the Technocracy. They happen to be my favorite group of mages in the World of Darkness. I quite enjoy them. I usually tend to play a lot of Technocracy agents as I go. Now, one thing to know from the beginning is that as a whole, there are like 5 conventions in the Technocracy. Each one very kind of specific in what it tends to entail and what it tends to be in charge of. But the Technocracy as a whole are a group of mages that are very much a technological bent to everything they do, and generally tend to be trying to get the world to conform to their view of the world in order to, bring about harmony with the one vision. 1984 by George Orwell is a big, heavy influence in the Technocracy, just to give you an idea of why they tend to be antagonists. All right? All right. With that little overview out of the way, let's get on to the 5 tips. Number 5 is that everything is science. Keep that in mind. Anything that has to do with spirituality or religion or gods or anything supernatural and weird, it is not ever tended to be spoken of by the Technocracy as spirits. No. They are ethereal entities. Werewolves are lycanthropes. Vampires are possibly still referred to as vampires because there is an actual disease known as vampirism, a mental disorder that makes you think you need blood to live. Even what they do, they don't call it magic. No. They are procedures and effects that they pull off. Different ways, different terminology, all of it couched in science. Everything that they do tends to have some sort of a scientific explanation to it. Even their magic is called super science because they believe it's science. It's just not science that the world is ready to believe in just yet, because they follow what's called the consensus. And the consensus is what the world as a whole believes is possible, as well as what the Technocracy are trying to manipulate and maintain is that consensus. So as long as that's maintained, things tend to be okay. Now, number 4, we'll move on to the next tip. Number 4 is that tools are important because the Technocracy, which is a little different than most of the tradition mages. The tradition mages tend to be very much fly-by-night in terms of how their foci work. Depending on what tradition you're in, your foci tend to be slightly guided, but they can use pretty much anything. Some mages, once they get even powerful enough, are able to forego foci completely and just be like magic, just like that. The Technocracy, on the other hand, don't have that ability, at least not until they get real powerful. Most Technocracy tend to rely on their tools, which is what they call foci. They tend to rely on their devices, their weapons, their computers, their cell phones, and so on, to do their magical effects. So having tools and foci is very important to a technocratic mage, because Some people even forego that entirely, saying that note the Technocracy have to have foci all the time. They can't do an effect without a foci, which is kind of interesting. I like that idea of it. So that's number 4. Your tools are important. You're going to want to make sure if you make a character, you keep that in mind. What foci is your character going to have? It might actually be actual tools that they work with. That it could be that for their foci, but you're going to want to keep that in mind. Number 3 is that secrecy is essential to being a technocratic agent because you technically are working for what a lot of people consider the government. Um, I mean, one of the nicknames for the technocracy are Men in Black. So yeah, you are not going to want to advertise anything. You're going to want to keep things under the radar. There's always going to need to be an explanation for everything that happens. So getting involved in a firefight in the middle of town square, probably not going to happen. A lot more behind the scenes stuff tends to go on with the technocracy and how they play out, simply because of that need for secrecy. Because the more people know about them, the more that knowledge impinges on the consensus and can change things. And you don't want that. You want to keep things going the way you want it. You want to be directing how the public is believing. And that is why secrecy is essential. So you're going to want to keep that in mind when you're making a character to play for the technocracy. You want to keep that in mind that you're going to need to be under the radar, especially if you happen to have a technocratic agent that has cybernetic implants and enhancements, uh, such as an arm cannon, because that sort of thing will immediately attract paradox if a sleeper views it. And it's not something you can whip out at any one time. So it's always something to keep in the back of your mind when you're creating, that you need to be a little more stealthy, a little more secretive. Number 2, my second, or no, fourth tip, but it's the number 2 tip, is that there is a hierarchy at play. Um, the technocracy is an organization. It has a structure and a hierarchy. There's always a boss, generally above you. I believe the highest level of boss in an area, like a large geographical area, tends to be called control. And they're the ones that call the shots and report to the higher ups, the heads of the technocracy. But for any player characters, generally there will always be a boss above you, and maybe a boss above them and above them. Uh, so there's a hierarchy at play. It's like a lot of office politics, if anyone knows about them, dealing with bosses and your coworkers and whatnot. That dynamic is there. That hierarchy is there, and you're going to need to keep that in mind uh, as you're creating your character. Because if you have a character that very much is like pushing against everybody and doesn't work well with others, chances are they're not going to do well in the technocracy. That doesn't mean you can't play it, because there are certain other merits and flaws with the technocratic characters that can fit really well, such as there's one, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it basically means that you've broken the rules a little one time too many, and you're basically like one strike away from being re-educated, and the technocracy has their eyes on you because you're too much of a rule breaker, a loose cannon, so to speak. That's a flaw for technocratic characters, and I love the fact that it is, because it offers that leeway. But keep that in mind when you're making characters, because you don't want to make a character and expect to be able to get away with pushing boundaries and shit in the technocracy, because they'll stamp on that pretty hard. Um, there's a reason why a lot of uh, there's a reason why the biggest strength of the technocracy is that their members are able to work together in concert so much more than the traditions, which are fragmented and have varying viewpoints. Being a technocrat means you have one viewpoint, one central vision, which really allows them to work together a lot. So that hierarchy, that structure is there. And the last tip that I have, the number one tip for playing the Technocracy, is something that a lot of people don't really give a lot of thought to, but it's very important for the Technocracy if you want to play that character. Um, and that tip is that you are not the bad guys. The Technocracy is not the bad guys. If you're going to play a technocratic character, keep that right in the forefront of your mind. You're not the bad guy here. You're trying to save reality. The tradition mages willy-nilly using their abilities and warping and twisting reality is fraying it, tearing it apart at the seams. As the Technocracy, it's your job to stitch things back together, to keep unfathomable horrors from happening to innocent people. You're the good guys. You're the protectors of the world and of reality. That's your job. And that's the neat thing about the Technocracy as a potential playable character race, is that you can have all this happening and have them still be doing horrible things to tradition mages, but they're doing it because they believe they are the good guys. And the best part is that they're not wrong. Doesn't mean the traditions are wrong either. They can both be right, just be right from different viewpoints, different standings on what is acceptable and what's not. And that's one of the fantastic things about World of Darkness and the Technocracy in general. So there you have it. 5 tips for playing the Technocracy in the World of Darkness. I hope you have enjoyed watching. I'm enjoying telling you all about this. So yes, thank you all so much for watching. If you like what I'm doing, please give that like button a tap. Give that subscribe button a tap as well if you haven't already, so you can be kept apprised of when I do new videos. And throw a comment in the comment section. What do you like about the Technocracy? Are they your favorite mage type? And if not, why? And if they are, why? Tell me. Let's get a discussion going in the comments. I'd love to talk to some people. So do all that, and take care, and I will see you next time.